Hello, I'm Pedro Mora with Pacific Media, and now Pauline. Sol Arves, the co-founder of the Canadian Department of Peace Initiative, says that there should be an ongoing opportunity for we the people to participate in the legislation, the initiative and the legislation of the Peace Bill 373. And today we present a public hearing about this particular bill in front of 3 appointed peace commissioners. This public hearing took place at Langara College in Vancouver on May 5th, 2012.
We have, as you know, been seeking a bill now for some years, and a man with the same first name, Bill Siksay here, one of our commissioners, was the architect of the first bill. It was presented in September 2009 and did not get beyond first reading before Parliament dissolved for the last election. It was then reintroduced by another member of the NDP, Alex Atamanenko, also from British Columbia, in November 30th of 2011. And we are now seeking removing it towards second reading in this sitting of the House. We began actually in the fall of 2003. We've been at this for a number of years, but we always knew that the initiative to create a Department of Peace would take at least a decade. And we didn't know how the national political scene would evolve either, so it may take a little more time. Victoria was a founding chapter along with Ottawa, and we now have 12 chapters across the country in most major cities. And this is the third consultation that has been held. The first was in Hamilton and then Toronto, and we are the third, and there'll be others as we go across the country. What we're essentially trying to do is emulate what the federal government, maybe provincial governments too, used to do regularly. They would prepare a white paper, a policy paper, and then they would conduct public hearings across the country for people to make submissions on that bill and to exercise their responsibility and participation as citizens in a vigorous democracy. That is virtually non-existent now. And we hope to hear from you. Now we can hear from you in a variety of ways. You don't have to have anything written. We're quite happy to have discussion with the commissioners who will interact with you to try and see, we're looking at, does the bill make sense to you? What do you really like about the bill? What would you otherwise like to see in a bill like this? How do you see a bill like this furthering and fostering a culture of peace in Canada? Because the ultimate objective is a culture of peace and nonviolence in our country and around the world. Our participation as Canadians, as Canada, and Canada in the world, that's a very important part of what we're trying to do. So some of the ideas with the bill, I'll just read a few things here. Dedicated to peace building and the study of the conditions that are conducive to both domestic and international peace. And in particular, the Department must hold peace as an organizing principle of society. That we always look at the world, ourselves and our members of Parliament and at all levels of government, through a lens of peace building. Strengthen non-military means of peacemaking. Canada recently has stressed much more a kind of a military, muscular, belligerent, really, position in the world, and we're trying to counteract that. And also to be consistent with the history of this country, which is much more in the field of UN peace building, peace diplomacy. We were highly recognized for this work. This is changing. To develop new structures for the nonviolent resolution of conflict. To address matters both domestic and international in scope, and to support initiatives from local communities, religious groups, and non-governmental organizations.
I support the domestic, national, and international reach of the bill because I see that all those areas need to be coordinated in the single vision and focus on peace. Conflict, on whatever level it occurs, doesn't have to be resolved in a destructive or violent manner. It can be transformed when thoughtful, intelligent attention is paid to differing worldviews and a genuine search instigated for truth and reconciliation. There's already a significant number of informed, dedicated people working in Parliament, in our communities, in our schools and families, and now an increasing number of trained international peace professionals and civilian peace service members operating with an integral vision that sees and listens to all sides in conflicts and works to move combatants away from ideological frameworks and intellectual theories as their basis of operation. Bill C-373 outlines a structure to enable the government, communities, and individuals to collaborate and ultimately become the groundswell needed to engender a Department of Peace in Canada. To those that have doubts about the feasibility of such a department being created, it may be remembered, as Sol referred to, that it wasn't too long ago that the idea of a Department of Environment would have seemed equally unlikely. And now there are fully functional federal and provincial partners in that critical department. I've been involved with the movement for the creation of a Department of Peace since 2005. I recognize it will likely be a slow and arduous process. However, if we assume that there will never be enough time for it to be achieved, this is what will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. A Minister and Department of Peace will have the ability to fill a critical need in government in this time of huge turmoil in our country and the world. A Department of Peace dedicated to viewing domestic, national, and international affairs through a lens of peace will bring an element of harmony and balance back to this country that is moving fast, and I would suggest against the will of the majority, into a role of belligerent on the world stage.
And Sol and Penny both mentioned the sort of overall policy framework around peace and Canada's military and the assumption that Canadians had that we were a nation of peacekeepers. And that's always been, it was very frustrating for me being in Parliament at a time when Canada was at war and when decisions were being made about Canada being at war, and yet it still didn't seem to push that sense that we were a peacemaking nation out of, even though everything we were doing sort of flew in the face of that, this kind of lurked back there. And my sense was that we never really nailed that down. We had this assumption that we were a nation of peacemakers, but it really was only that. We didn't have an infrastructure, a government infrastructure that would lead us somewhere else, as this legislation might do, for instance.
At the core of the Baha'i Faith is the teaching that humankind is one, and that world peace is not only possible, but it is inevitable. And it is the next step in the evolution of humankind. The inordinate disparity between rich and poor, a source of acute suffering, keeps the world in a state of instability, virtually on the brink of war. We see that unbridled nationalism, as distinguished from a sane and legitimate patriotism, must give way to a wider loyalty to the love of humanity as a whole. Religious strife throughout history has been the cause of innumerable wars and conflicts. It is also a major blight to progress and is increasingly abhorrent to the peoples of all faiths and no faith. The challenge facing the religious leaders of mankind is to contemplate with hearts filled with the spirit of compassion and a desire for truth the plight of humanity, and to ask themselves whether they cannot, in humility before God, submerge their theological differences in a great spirit of mutual forbearance that will enable them to work together for the advancement of human understanding and peace. 2 points bear emphasizing. One is that the abolition of war is not simply a matter of signing treaties and protocols. It is a complex task requiring a new level of commitment to resolving issues not customarily associated with the pursuit of peace. Based on political agreements alone, the idea of collective security is a chimera. The other point is that the primary challenge in dealing with issues of peace is to raise the context to the level of principle as distinct from pure pragmatism. For in essence, peace stems from an inner state supported by a spiritual or moral attitude, and it is chiefly in evoking this attitude that the possibility of enduring solutions can be found. In the Baha'i view, recognition of the oneness of humankind calls for no less than reconstruction and the demilitarization of the whole civilized world. The League of Nations, the United Nations, many other organizations and agreements have been unquestionably helpful in attenuating some of the negative and internal conflicts, international and internal conflicts, but they have shown themselves incapable of preventing war. A vision that we are trying to put in practice is that a world community in which all economic barriers will have been permanently demolished and the interdependence of capital definitely recognized, in which the clamor of religious fanaticism and strife will be forever stilled, in which the flame of racial animosity will have been extinguished, in which a single code of international law shall have as its sanction the instant and coercive intervention of a combined force of the federated units, and finally create a world community in which the fury of capricious and militant nationalism will have been transmuted into consciousness of a world citizenship. The tool that we feel brings about the possibility for peace is that of consultation. That it's a fundamental tool that is used in the Baha'i communities everywhere to come to recognize that the power sits with the individual and that it becomes a force through the volition of the collective at the will to take action and to practice what we believe. Thank you so much.
So you ran out of time, and
Yes.
you were just going to talk about the consultation tool. And I have a feeling you could say more about how that's used in the Baha'i community as a way of, as a way of decision making, as a way of operating in a context of
Please
peace.
complete your paper. I think we have the time.
In the Baha'i community, we have perhaps maybe a true democratic way of organizing the community, which is at the grassroots level, at the national level, and at the international level. And that is Baha'i communities that have 9 adults in one place form what's called a spiritual assembly. And spiritual assemblies are elected without any campaigning, without any lobbying, but the collective comes together and votes in a spirit of secrecy and dedication to the process, and they elect the 9 that have the highest votes. And then these 9 form what's called a spiritual assembly, and the members come together and they consult about the issues that face the community, whether it's some spiritual guidance, whether there's a crime of one person against another, whether there's spiritual groups that are going on. We have a few activities that we offer the community, and they're under the guidance of the spiritual assembly, children's classes, junior youth groups, an ongoing educational process, different community building activities at the level of the neighborhood. So then the spiritual assemblies, they come together and they do follow this consultative process that is at the core of it frank and loving consultation, and that it is through the spark of differing opinions that truth arises. So it's this very respectful process that you were talking about, the value of consultation. So when the problem is identified, that would be through research and so on, and then through a process of consultation, then the path would be identified and so on. So I hope that answered your question, Bill. We have the same system at the national and then at the international levels.
One of the things that concerns me is about the question of putting a Department of Peace into government, is that many of us talk about government in an us and them kind of relationship, like they're those bad guys out there, do they not have a brain, and then there's all the good people are not the ones in government. how do you see that resolving and moving forward into a greater sense of community?
So we're a non-partisan community. We view it, we don't become involved in the partisan aspect of political life because we view it as often adversarial. And fundamentally at the core, you're laughing, at the core of the Baha'i faith is the oneness of humanity and united focus. So we engage with the political system. So I think that the way that government can work in this framework is that it's a collaborative process and that we see each of us as a participant and an agent in that process so that each voice and each spirit has the same weight, right? It's based on the concept that all are equal and that it's the individual that has the power, but that the capacity to change coalesces out of the collective volition to make that change. And then it's the government that enacts that based on the true will of the majority of the people. And so governments are called on to put in place processes that engage the community.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary.
I mean, we spend so much time defending ourselves against our governors, or I guess our government, with protecting ourselves, protecting our environment, that sort of thing. Those guiding principles, we are supposed to be able to, we say, and it translates sometimes as apathy. We're supposed to be able to go about our lives, do the right thing, voting, maybe coach Little League, bake sales, whatever, bottle drives to raise money for some good cause. And the politicians that we elect are supposed to go and take care of the rest. Well, more and more that's not happening. So the thing that I'm really encouraged by this initiative to establish the Department of Peace is that it's going to cause Canadians to focus on that particular thing and about the role of ourselves as citizens in the country, but also in the world. So I guess really, I really appreciate what you said. I really appreciate and understand much more about the Baha'i faith, and I see that we're all basically aligned very much similarly to what you spoke about. And that's the kind of thing that will create, again, the groundswell, the idea of groundswell, people going toward the good. That's a Greek expression, pai kala, go toward the good. Thank you.
And I believe that we get caught up into ideas and isms sometimes rather than see the collectivity, and lots has been said today, but it seems to me reason why I wanted to have a word to say is there's no mention of the abuse of power. We have massive abuse of power all over the world, in our own country. We don't stand up to it. The media uses a little bit for its own agenda to divide. But if you're not going to recognize when power is being abusive, it doesn't matter where. Doesn't matter what the issue is. We've already lost the game of peace. If the intent of the government is to give good management and good governance, that's one thing. If the intent of a government, however elected, whatever type, is to rule and control, you don't even have democracy, just the facade of a democracy. Every one of us has to have an understanding of the intent of a nation. Different points of view, and if we don't do that, we're going to be sidelined and go over the precipice and take the whole country with us.
A key piece that I think is missing here, and it's where I also struggle, is the notion of justice. I think if discussion about peace without addressing the fundamental economic inequalities that exist in the world today are not, I don't see that addressed in the chart at all. So what I would like to suggest is that that it would be important for this bill to link those issues of peace with justice, particularly economic inequality. And so I have a question about what role this bill plays in addressing and linking those issues and the interrelationship.
I think what we're talking about in this legislation, to my mind anyway, is ensuring that there is one person sitting at the cabinet table that is totally bound up in the whole idea of building a culture of peace and has certain levers at their hand, and so is an advocate for that kind of process there. I think that one of the challenges of this legislation is hiving off different responsibilities from different existing ministries. Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for instance, Ministry of Defense, other Ministry of Justice, and how you reorganize government around those things. The economic policy is a piece of it that's absolutely crucial to all of that as well, and so how you would influence the development of policy in the Department of Finance for someone in this position. I mean, you could take that global perspective and completely redesign government, or you can add a position that specifically has some advocacy and some specific responsibilities, which I think is where this bill goes. I'm babbling out loud in terms of my understandings, but I see I think you've raised a very, very important point in terms of how that gets done. I think we have to remember we're talking about one position in an existing model. I think you're talking about something that's even more revolutionary and necessary and that kind of thing. And maybe it can be incorporated in this when we get to the point of doing that work.
I am representing Mennonite Church British Columbia, which is one of the denominations in that family here in BC. And I just wanted to say that, very briefly, that our position has always been that we come alongside of government as well as other faith groups in areas where we have common interest. And so, and we are a historic peace church, and so peace has been at the center of who we are right from our beginnings. And so on these kind of initiatives, we come alongside. And so then sometimes it's hard for us to know how to come alongside of government and other faith groups, as other faith groups have been represented here. And so we have that common willingness to come alongside. So the other piece I was going to just say is that because we're a congregational structured church, many of our congregations have responded to this initiative as well. And congregations are free to respond in their own way. And I was just reading a letter that was from a congregation in Ontario written to the federal government in support of this bill. And so it happens as our congregations are free. And so we have several representatives here from a congregation here in Vancouver who have taken significant initiatives, in this area as well.
My name is Joseph Roberts, and I started a magazine called Common Ground, inspired by the Walk for Peace. The Walk for Peace happened in spring, Common Ground happened in the fall. So I'm dedicating the June edition of Common Ground in service of the Walk for Peace, which will be Saturday, June 30th. And everybody is welcome. At one time, the people in the corporations at the top said, we can't stop slavery, it would ruin the economy. They probably might say the same thing about peace. But the people know that peace is good for the economy, it's good for the ecology, it's good for all future generations.
What I want to talk about is compassion. I think that's a very important part of peace, and there is a network, a compassion network starting in cities around the world. There's a couple of other comments I wanted to make, and one was about the restorative justice, which I really love restorative justice, but I think if you get government involved in it, it's going to ruin the whole concept. That's my personal opinion. And then you said something about government and business, and I always felt that government should be here to protect us from big business. And that's not happening. What I see happening is government officials climbing into bed with big business, and I think that's a really sad event.
International Affairs and the Department of Defense, they usually coordinate with America and NATO. So would they be in conflicting, whenever the ideas conflict, what would happen? Because usually Canada would side with them, like they have a joint peace agreement with the US to build military airplanes. So how do we use them if we're going to be the Department of Peace? So I just wanted to get your guys' ideas on that.
Well, it's not unlike the question that Leslie put to us too, in terms of where does economic policy figure in all of this? Because I think that there's sort of the micro proposal of ensuring that there's at least one cabinet minister who has some mandate to advocate for peace at the cabinet table. And then there's kind of a macro agenda that says we need to transform how we do government generally, and look at the whole broad perspective of how all of these things interrelate, and does the structure that we have allow us to do the kinds of things we believe are important to do in Canada and around the world. I think that the proposal as it stands now is kind of the foot in the door. It allows us to say that there's going to be at least one voice at the cabinet table that's going to be the spokesperson for that culture of peace, and try and get that voice heard at the cabinet table, have some resources to do some of the work there and more broadly in the community. But that there is a lot more to be done beyond that. And certainly our whole international obligations, our treaty obligations, our military agreements, all of those are things that we're probably going to want to look at, as is our economic policy, as is the way our justice system operates. Those are all very big questions. I think the proposal that we have before us is a more modest proposal in that sense. It's not the grand transformation, it's not the revolution, but it's, I think, a foot in the door that says something important is lacking in the current structure, and we need to change that now. And I think it leads us to ask other questions and hopefully ask those bigger questions. But for me, it's that initial step, that first step, that foot in the door.
And I think that when government functions well, there is a balance of voices. So there is the voice that says, we better get in there with bombs, and there is another voice that says there is an alternative, and the voices are listened to. There is an actual, genuine dialogue happening. And I think our adversarial system is getting in the way of that. That's certainly a serious issue that we need to work.
We heard Mary-Wynne McWatters, a member of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, emphatically suggest that we will continue to suffer abuse of political power as long as we continue to let political representatives decide for us. We the people need to participate on the development of our own legislation. And the Peace Bill C-373 of the Department of Peace is a good place to start. You can explore Perpetual Direct Democracy, published by Amazon.com, or you can read it online on Pacific.ca.